Hi, and welcome back to our third video in this Advent series. This week, we're celebrating the third week of Advent, lighting our third candle, the candle for joy. In today's video, we're going to talk about 3 steps for living a joy-filled life, even when life may seem a bit dark. We're going to talk about what is joy and how you can find joy in your life. I'm Catherine Shire, and I'm so glad that you've joined us here today. Keep watching, and let's dive into our week of joy. One of my great joys is to be able to pray with readers and viewers who send in their prayer requests. It's an honor and a privilege, and I had a reader recently send me this prayer request from her darkest place. And I had this opportunity to pray for her. She was at her lowest point, a life devoid of hope, struggles that were so immense, and challenges so steep she didn't know how she'd climb out of it. And yet she wanted me to pray with her for change. As I read her story again and prayed for her, I knew this was a change that only God could work. Too often, this world is such a dark place, isn't it? The world tries to take away our hope and our peace and our joy. The trials and suffering of this world are immense. The dangers very real. So how can we live a joy-filled life even in such a world? Even when we're in such a dark place? As I was preparing this message, I got an email in my inbox. I opened it up and read it, and it was from this same woman. And as I read this email, my heart stopped. Because I read these words in it that said, "My heart is overwhelmed with joy at the work God is doing in my life." Overwhelmed with joy. This woman who had been at her darkest hour, a life devoid of all hope. Insurmountable obstacles in her path, and now through God, only because of God, she is overwhelmed with joy. So how can you get there too? Keep watching, and we're going to dive into 3 ways that you too can live a joy-filled life. So what is joy? Let's start by defining it, and then we'll look at how we can live with more joy in our lives. Let's start off by saying that joy is different than happiness. Happiness is based on a situation in your life, whether things are good and going along well and you're happy in your life. But joy comes from a much deeper place. You can be filled with joy even when your life isn't happy. Joy comes from God. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit that God gives to His believers. We see that in Galatians 5:22 and 23. Experiencing joy is a choice we make, a choice to choose to accept God's gift and allow our hearts to rejoice. There's a definition I found that says joy is an orientation of the heart. It's a state of mind that comes from choosing to turn your heart to God. So how can we live a joy-filled life? Today, we're going to look at the story of the Magi and learn 3 steps to living a more joy-filled life. So I want to start off today reading the passage about the Magi. We're in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So the first step toward living a joy-filled life is to focus your attention on God. Living a joy-filled life begins with orienting your heart toward God. The wise men saw a star rise in the western sky and oriented their lives to studying and tracking it. They knew this star was something different, something special. We don't know a lot about their next steps or how they studied it, but we know they turned their attention and studied the star. The wise men in the East were known to be scholars and academics, so they likely spent a lot of time studying the star and the scriptures to determine its significance. Perhaps they also had other signs from God to know that this was no ordinary star. But let's look at the difference in the attention to God that the Magi had versus the leaders in Jerusalem. They both knew and studied the scriptures. The Magi knew the scriptures and the prophecies, and they knew this star was an indication of something extraordinary. So they came asking for the one who had been born the King of the Jews. They knew the scripture and believed in the Messiah. The Jewish leaders also knew the scriptures inside and out. They had studied and taught from them their whole lives. They could recite every verse. But their hearts were not yet open to the possibility of the Messiah actually coming. They were fearful of this change and what it might mean to them. It might upset their power and positions. Everything they knew might change. And they were unwilling to open their hearts to this possibility of God's miracle. So where is your attention turned? Is your attention turned to God? Is your heart open to the possibility of His work in your life? Are you studying the Bible and learning the scriptures? Developing a relationship with God through prayer? Is your heart open to whatever it is He might bring to pass in your life? If you want to discover God's extraordinary joy, open up your heart to Him and to all of God's possibilities and set your focus on Him. Step number 2 toward living a joy-filled life is to follow where God leads. Following God is a lot like following the star. You got to make sure that you've validated your directional signals against Scripture. You've done your homework, you've discerned, and you've listened, and you've studied. God may not send you a star, but He will likely send you signals along the way that guide you. You will have to step out in faith, knowing that you won't have a whole map laid out in front of you to guide your way. The road may not be perfectly clear or easy or quick. There may be periods of time that you keep walking without directional confirmation. You will journey through darkness, storms, uncertainty, fear, but yet what a reward to follow where God leads. When the Magi saw the star, they were overjoyed. It appeared over the house where the child was. They came and they worshiped the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed before him and worshiped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, precious gifts they'd brought to him. God led the Magi straight to Jesus, and they were overjoyed. They were so moved to bow down and worship him that the infant, the one they knew in their hearts, he was the Messiah. Through all the uncertainties and all the dangers of this call to follow the star, they found a joy that overwhelmed their hearts. a joy that comes from being in the presence of Jesus and committing your heart to follow wherever it is that he leads. So if you want to live a joy-filled life, no matter the uncertainties and difficulties along the journey, follow God's path in all that you do. The third step toward living a joy-filled life is don't follow those who are not oriented toward God. The Magi were certain who to follow. They had committed themselves to following the star that was sent to them from God and finding Jesus. We hear that they were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, and they went home by a different route. I wonder if they hadn't already discerned that Herod's heart wasn't quite in the right place, that his heart wasn't oriented to God and full of good intentions. Did they need an angel to come and tell them that in a dream? Or had they picked up on that already? Surely they sensed that his intentions weren't pure to come and worship the baby. But the angel in their dreams gave them just that confirmation their hearts already knew: to be wise about who you follow. Choose friends, mentors, influencers who have their hearts oriented to God. Those who don't will lead you away from joy. Was there any joy in Herod and those in his inner circle who were so afraid of the Messiah's birth? Was there any joy in what came next after the wise men went back to their country? Don't let anyone else steal your joy. Choose your friends and counsel wisely. Select those who also have their hearts oriented to God. Living a joy-filled life is a choice, not a circumstance. You won't always be happy in this life, but you can have a joy-filled life. Joy is a gift from God, a fruit of the Spirit. It comes from living a life connected to God and following where he leads. So will you step out in faith and find that joy in your life? The road won't be easy, but what a reward to find the joy that overwhelms your heart. Have you seen his star? Will you follow it to find Jesus in your life? Will you commit your life to seeking him and following the path he sets before you? And will you choose to live a life filled with joy? Thanks for joining me this week as we've celebrated our third week in Advent. I hope that this video was an encouragement to you. I hope you'll join me again. Thanks for watching this week. I'll see you next time.